You're listening to Nutrition Matters Podcast with Paige Smathers, registered dietitian nutritionist.
Hi everyone, it's Paige Smathers. Thanks so much for being here. Nutrition Matters Podcast explores what really matters in nutrition and health with a sensitive and realistic approach. To help support the podcast, please consider making a donation at positive-nutrition.com/podcast. If you find this episode interesting, engaging, or helpful in your life, please consider donating, sharing with friends and family, and leaving a review on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, whatever podcast app you use to listen to this podcast. You can leave a review about this podcast straight from your podcast app. Search Nutrition Matters Podcast, click reviews, and then write a review. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook if you'd like to have a little more food for thought. Thank you for listening. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Nutrition Matters Podcast. Thanks so much for joining me today. I'm, as always, really excited to share this podcast with you. I think it's going to be a really helpful conversation about what it's like to go from following rigid meal plans to embracing a bit more flexibility with food. So the way we do this in this podcast episode is through a story of a registered dietitian named Devry Pettit, who is a dietitian in Utah, and she talks about her professional experience and personal experience with this topic. And then we also talk about, what action steps you can actually take if you're finding yourself making this transition and kind of curious about what can I focus on? What can I work on? And how do I know if it's getting out of line one way or another? How do I know if I'm doing this the quote right way? We dive into some of those questions. So thank you again so much for joining me. And before we get into that little conversation, I just wanted to say a couple quick things. The first thing is I have something coming out for you in just a couple weeks, and I'm really excited about this. So if you're interested in being one of the first to hear about it, please feel free to subscribe on my website. I will be offering deals for people who are subscribers. So that's just positive-nutrition.com. It's on the front page. You scroll all the way down to the bottom and just subscribe to the newsletter. I hardly ever send stuff out. It's just kind of here and there. So you won't be getting any annoying emails. But yeah, so join there. And also be sure to just follow me on social media. I'm at Paige Smathers RD on Instagram and Facebook, and I will be sharing with you what I've been up to very soon. And again, I'm really, really excited about this. This is something brand new and fun. Also, as always, if you're interested in kind of joining the conversation outside of the podcast, kind of being a little bit of a part of a community of like-minded people who are working on similar things, go ahead and join us over in the private Facebook group. We are Nutrition Matters Podcast community on Facebook. And, again, that's not a super spammy thing either. That's just kind of here and there, supporting each other, posting articles, posting, wins. It's a lot of fun. So join us there if you're interested. And then, as always, sometimes people reach out wanting to know how they can give back. Maybe sometimes people express that they've gotten a lot from the podcast. And so I always just like to say, if you'd like to give back to the podcast with a donation, that's always helpful. And I always like to explain to people that what I do with the donations is I put them in a separate account, and I use the money that I get in donations to go toward my continuing education so that I can, stay connected socially with other professionals, and then also just connected with the latest research. So just know that that's what your donation is going toward. And again, it's always nice for people to know I don't, get rich from this podcast at all. Here and there, little donations is awesome, and just want to make sure no one thinks that I'm making tons of money off of this. But just little things here and there is super helpful and does go toward continuing to be able to make this possible. So thank you for that. Also, if you'd like to give back and it's just not in the cards for you to donate financially, that is A-okay. Another way you can give back is by sharing the podcast episodes, sharing conversations that have been helpful for you. sharing it on social media or even just one-on-one with a family or friend, family member or friend, that's always so appreciated. And then obviously reviews online are really helpful as well. So especially iTunes, if you can just pop in there, leave a quick review, that's always really, really helpful as well. So thanks again for tuning into this episode, and I really hope that this is a helpful and supportive conversation in your process or in your process with helping someone else kind of figure out how to navigate this transition from rigid plans to kind of more of that flexible style of eating with food. All right, let's get into talking with Devry.
Hi, Devry. Welcome to Nutrition Matters podcast, and thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited because I'm a major podcast fan, and I send out weekly newsletters, which have not been weekly in the summer, but yours is one of my favorites. So I've sent out many of yours in my newsletter because I listen to it at the gym or in the car when I'm driving all the time. So I am excited to be on a podcast.
Yay. Yeah. Is this your first one?
Yeah, it
Yay!
is. Yeah, it is.
I'm so honored. Mm-hmm. Definitely not your last. This is great. So take a minute to just kind of introduce yourself to the listeners, explain who you are and what you do, and then we'll dive into the topic.
Okay, so yeah, I'm a registered dietitian, and I have a small private practice called Happily Fed. I mainly started on Instagram, and so I meet with a few clients, but I do group intuitive eating coaching, and I have a membership that takes meal planning in a form of self-care, not restriction, just ideas, inspiration. I like to cook and experiment in the kitchen, so that's kind of where that falls into place, and so that is just a subscription called Be Happily Fed. So yeah.
Nice. That, I mean, I can't deny how tough it can be for me to like come up with what to eat. So sometimes a little inspiration is like super helpful.
Yes, and I love to eat and get inspiration, but yeah, I'm also like, oh, do I have to make another meal again? I think.
Why do we need to eat
that.
so much? We're never done eating.
Sometimes it's a pain for sure.
Yeah. Awesome. So, and you're in South
Jordan.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So for anyone who's not local to Salt Lake, that's just kind of a Salt Lake suburb, right?
Like a half hour south of here. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. And we're recording live in my office, which I'm doing more of these days, which is so fun.
Darling here. Yes.
Okay. So talk a little bit about your experience being a registered dietitian. I know you have a really interesting story of how things have evolved for you along the years, and then that's also going to give us a good framework to kind of talk about some of the important themes of your work and how things have shifted. That's going to give us the ability to kind of talk about some important topics that I think are really interesting for people. Mm-hmm. So yeah, let's start personal, and then we'll kind of extend it into how people listening might be able to learn from your story.
Okay, so I think my experience as a dietitian can go back way, like from when I was a little girl, but I passed the RD exam 3 weeks before I gave birth to my first kid, who is almost 11, and so now I have 4 kids. So my career as a dietitian has always been a balancing act of being a mom first and trying to pursue my passions in nutrition. And so that means I became pregnant during my internship, which was in New York. And it was a very weight loss focused food purity program. So pretty diet culture based. And so that was kind of fresh in my head while I was gaining weight as a pregnant person. And it was new, like nothing I'd gone through before. And you think you have these ideas in your head of how it's going to go, and it doesn't go that way. And I gained way more than you're supposed to, like according to that dumb scale range. And so I think for me, that was kind of like, I felt a little bad about it. Like I was a bad example of a nutrition professional because I didn't fit within that mold. So I feel like my really early career as a dietitian and throughout has been kind of a wave of balancing this part of me that wants to be a good example as a nutrition professional, whatever that meant, and also be like level-headed and real about it. Like, it doesn't matter. So I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but like just balancing the two of being a normal person, but also being what you think you're supposed to be, you know?
Totally. And what does that balance look like? And what is it that you're actually supposed to be? Like, trying to even put your finger on that is tough.
Yes. And at the time, because of my experience, it was, you should be a certain size. You shouldn't gain more than you're supposed to. And everything's changed since then, like maturity, life experience, just research and practice, and lots of experience have changed that for me. So,
yeah. Well, let's talk about that. So how did things evolve from there?
So my first job was at Lifetime Fitness as the nutrition coach, which I did not enjoy. I liked meeting one-on-one with people, but it was very salesy, and it was really fitness based. And I always felt like I wanted to be in the fitness world, but that I didn't belong. And I've always felt that, in my career. And then, so I didn't work there very long. And then I did corporate wellness for about 6 years. And at that time, towards the end of it, I had started my business through social media with one of my really good friends who's a personal trainer. So we started, it was called Pure Fit, Pure Food, and she did the workouts and I did all the food. And that was 2014 was when we started that. And at the time, we were promoting a meal plan that was just sold in the masses, and nobody else at the time was doing that. No, I mean, at least that I really knew about it, not locally for sure. At that time, everyone was doing Whole30. I feel like that's right when Whole30 took off, and a lot of social media accounts took off of their Whole30 journey, and their experimenting in the kitchen, which I always thought was a positive thing from Whole30, to see people get in the kitchen and try new things and learn how to cook. And so that I wanted to be different from that. So we were doing different things than that. And so our meal plan was not restrictive at all. And did you get a lot of meal planning practice in your undergrad or internship? Or?
Yeah, but I actually hate planning meals. So like whenever I would have an assignment to do it, I'd just like put my head down and get it done. But I never could wrap my head around it once I was in practice. I was just like, I'll help you brainstorm, but I am not gonna give you Monday 9 a.m. eat this. Like my brain can't think of food.
Yeah, for me, in my undergrad, we had like a semester. People can read about it. I have it on my website, my story of what happened that semester when we did meal planning and weighed and measured each other. But in that setting, I was always taught that a meal plan was like a flexible thing. You know, like the diabetes exchange system, you would learn like if you don't like chicken, you can have steak or you can have this. Right. And it was very flexible. And so the meal plan I created, it didn't have any amounts. It talked about hunger, fullness. It was 10 weeks long. And it was really successful. And I always viewed it as a guideline. Like, I'm putting this out there, here's a guideline. But I quickly came to learn that people don't see it that way. They don't see it as a guideline. They see it very black and white. This dietitian is telling me to eat this and this and this for dinner. So if I don't, then I'm going off plan and I'm not doing what I'm supposed to, and feelings of failure or inadequacy come up. And that did really well. Every time we posted about it, it would sell and we made money. And so then as it progressed and the years went on, more people were doing juicing and macros crept into the play. And so I felt like I wanted to show them this like real and practical way. Like, you don't have to juice for 3 days. You don't have to juice for 7 days. You don't have to count your macros exactly. This is like an easier, better, more practical way to do it. And I think that was really convincing and eye-opening, and people loved that approach. But I can see now at the time that's like straddling the two sides. It's straddling intuitive eating with weight loss. And yes, that's completely unethical now that when your eyes are opened in that way. And also people began to sell meal plans, and they were all macros based. all more fitness industry based. And this could be a completely wrong assumption of me. But I think people that are gearing towards that lifestyle aren't necessarily doing it for health purposes. I think it's for physical, to change, adapt, and strengthen your body. And so that wasn't something that I really totally wanted to be a part of. And so I felt like that's when like the ickiness started like coming into play.
So what you're talking about here is really interesting, and I think anybody who's been who's a dietitian or been in maybe the fitness world even can relate to, is sometimes when you're in school or when you're new to this, sometimes it can feel like you think your audience is one group of people, but then you realize it, like you thought, oh, people are just going to take this as a guideline and it's going to be flexible. But then you realized, wow, when I talk, because of my credentials, people take me really seriously. And maybe my audience is actually more gung-ho, more motivated, more rigid, more type A personality than I thought. Because when you're in school, a lot of times you're told, man, people just are so lazy and they need to hear that they need to eat more fruits and vegetables and exercise more. And then in practice you realize, gosh, some people are actually eating too many vegetables and some people are exercising too much. And my message needs to reach those people too. Often those are the ones that are actually listening. Does that make sense?
Right. Yes. Totally agree. And that's totally what I felt. And I would get emails of people saying, I don't like this. Can I have this instead? Or I would get emails of people telling me, look, I packed my food. I'm going to my in-laws for dinner. I packed my food, and and I was like, no, like that's not, I was like, my personality is do the best you can. That's just how I survive life. Yeah. And that I understand that's not everyone's personality. And so that was kind of the emails were starting to kind of like weigh really heavy on me of that. And I did presentations a lot for different like fitness facilities around. And one time this girl came up to me and I was talking about Chick-fil-A because their waffle fries is how I survived pregnancy when I was super sick. Oh my gosh,
they're so good.
They're
and that
so
sauce,
good.
Are you kidding me? The Chick-fil-A sauce?
I could talk a lot about Chick-fil-A. I really like that company. And she was like, she put her hand on my arm and was like, wait, you eat at Chick-fil-A? And I was like, yes, I eat at Chick-fil-A. And I think there was all these different things that came into play of, I was like, what am I putting out there that is making people think that I am someone that I'm not? And I don't like that. I want to be real, and I want to be approachable, and I don't want to lie or be a fraud. Like, I want what I put out there to be who I am. And so that really bothered me. And I actually did, going back to the macro part, I had seen it through social media and the different like connections, and people were getting out their scales and weighing their food, which I was like, how do you weigh peanut butter? Like, you put a piece of bread on, you put peanut butter on, and then you're like trying to scrape it off so it matches the exact gram you think you're supposed to have, and people were weighing lettuce. And so I did this little experiment, and I did a blog post of it. I went and bought a food scale, and I did chicken and pasta and all this stuff, and I just used my hand like as a measurement, put it on the scale, and then I actually like measured it, and it wasn't even that off, like just eyeballing things. And so that was kind of my point, is you're spending all this time, your kids are watching you weigh and measure your food. What message is that sending when you can just kind of like balance it with your eyeballs, just like looking at it?
And you can also like, do the best you can to balance it, and then start eating it, and then pay attention to how you're feeling.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Like, and sometimes that means, oh, I actually need a little bit more pasta. But other times that means, oh, I'm not going to finish everything on my plate.
Yeah. And I think that's something that doesn't get talked about enough in any meal plan setting you're talking about, is how hungry or full you are, which I don't think you'd ever be too full on a meal plan. People would say that though, like, this is way too much food. I'm not used to eating this much food. And I mean, that's always kind of a thinker of, well, then what have you been eating if this is too much? So I just kept feeling like I didn't belong in this world, in social media, because that was a large part of my following, was was huge. I felt a little isolated. I felt like I wasn't connecting to other dietitians, and I wanted to connect more that way. And my partner, who is still my best friend, she got pregnant with her 4th kid, and she was very sick, and I wanted to kind of transition things, and she wanted to enjoy her last baby, and I wanted that for her, knowing that how it was with my last baby. I felt like I really savored and enjoyed that year, so I wanted that for her. And so it just kind of came to this place where she needed to be with her family, and I felt this huge pull that I needed to grow professionally. And it was scary because I don't like doing things by myself.
Yeah.
I don't. And when you're used to like kind of like brainstorming with someone and sharing the tasks and things, and then there's that level of, we'd done this for 4 years together, and then like, are people going to think we hate each other and we're not friends? And so there was like that part, which doesn't matter, but there was a lot. So I think the transition has been tough and scary, and it's been hard, but I've always felt like this is what the transition that I need to make.
Yeah. So I want to definitely talk more about what the transition has been like. But before we do that, let's take a few minutes and just kind of outline for anybody who might be new to this podcast or to these types of conversations. You mentioned that you kind of felt at one point like you were straddling paradigms. Let's just like really draw a picture for people so they know what that means, and really clarify maybe any questions people have about that. So you take a stab and then I'll ask questions.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, I was introduced to intuitive eating in college. We had a semester on it. I don't think most dietitians get that. So I was well aware of intuitive eating, but I don't think I was well aware of the fact that it shouldn't be combined with weight loss. I wasn't promoting intuitive eating, but I was using things like the hunger fullness scale, things that were important in that, but that wasn't like my sole focus. And when I went back to like review it and go through it, I was like, this is what I love. Intuitive eating is where I belong. This is what I want to promote. And I didn't really know at the time that there were like people that just did that on social media, because I was in this bubble of trying to be someone I didn't want to be. And so, so I started to like reach out to those people. Yeah.
So even taking it a step further back. So for anyone who's new to even this word intuitive eating, maybe they don't know what that means. I just want to clarify that. So diets are any plan or program that takes away your authority to make decisions about food, that externalizes your decisions about food and your bodily cues into, a piece of paper that says, this is what you should and shouldn't eat, this is right and this is wrong, this is what you eat, this is how you eat, this is when you eat. And so back in the day, that used to be pretty clear. They would say, okay, I'm on the Atkins diet, or I'm on the whatever diet. These days, diets are sneaky, they're tricky, right? So it's like, we don't say, oh, I'm on the macros diet. It's like, no, I'm just counting macros. It's a lifestyle, right? So it's almost even trickier to know whether or not you are on a diet these days, because it's so masqueraded as wellness or a lifestyle change or whatever. And I'm not saying wellness or lifestyle changes are a bad thing, but it's just important to recognize that dieting has kind of been reincarnated and it's trickier now. But what intuitive eating is it's trying to say, wait a minute, you don't need someone else to tell you what to eat. You don't need someone else to tell you when and how. Maybe you need some coaching and guidance to learn how to listen to that, but we're all born with the natural ability to be able to regulate our intake through appetite and through other means. And so intuitive eating, we can kind of put it up and draw a picture of intuitive eating is on one side and dieting is kind of on the other. And I don't really like that kind of like really black and white perspective, because I think there's room for gray in even all of this. But what I'm trying to kind of paint the picture for people to understand is there's a lot of push in the intuitive eating community to really encourage people to not straddle paradigms, meaning don't promote diet culture and intuitive eating at the same time. And so while people may lose weight with intuitive eating, that's not the focus. That's not the reason, right? So if someone's saying lose weight with intuitive eating, that's seen as really problematic because it's kind of one foot in diet culture, one foot in intuitive eating language, and it feels like co-opting. So that's the picture I just want people to understand, is when you say it felt a little bit like you were straddling paradigms, that's what you mean, is just like there was like a little bit of like diety stuff along with intuitive eating. But I also want to just mention that the first edition of intuitive eating, I'm not promoting it, I'm not saying like read it or whatever, but that's what I read at first. And it actually does talk a lot about weight loss. It talks about how intuitive eating is for weight loss. And so like I can see why people get confused. It's such a different approach to food to say, let's just let weight be what it is, but let's eat for our health and for our well-being and to have energy and to nurture ourselves.
Right.
So anyway, just want to say, like, we've all been there, done that.
Yes,
it's hard.
It is. I think the simplest way to maybe make the distinction, I don't know, you tell me what you think, is weight. If you just take that out of the equation and that's not your driving force for making changes, I think that's like just the biggest difference between anything else. I think that's also the sneaky part of whatever plan you're doing, is it can be promoted as wellness, because people are not doing the weight loss as much anymore, or at least trying not to. That is, yes, it can be promoted as wellness. So people are like, oh, I'm not trying to lose weight, I'm just trying to eat healthier, I'm just trying to do this. And I think that is where the sneaky part can come into play, when you don't know. Like,
well, it's so tricky, because also you could have really good intentions, but you do want to like eat a little bit better and grocery shop more and cook at home more, and it could be like totally fine and not take over your life and become an eating disorder.
And nourishment is a form of self-care. You need to be nourished. So yes, it gets tricky. But I feel like once I like really delved in, I mean, I really went headfirst into HAES and intuitive eating and just following anti-diet, non-diet dietitians. I listen to your podcast a lot. There's other podcasts that I love.
What are some other ones that you love, just for anyone listening who maybe hasn't been exposed?
I like Food Psych. I like the Body Positive. Well, what is that one?
Body Love Project?
Body Love Project, yes.
Jesse's?
Yes, Body Love Project. I also like any mental health. We have ADHD in my family, so there's a doctor, Ned Hallowell, does a distraction called podcast called Distraction, and so I really like his, and I think it aligns a lot into kind of some of these philosophies. But I reached out to dietitians. I've taken a couple courses. I reached out to an eating disorder dietitian, Marcy Evans, and I was like, I just want to make sure I have no lingering poor relationships with my food. That it's okay if I asked her, I was like, I really don't like McDonald's. Like, I think it's gross. Is that like diety in me? Is that like diet culture still embedded in me? She's like, no. So I think that's really important to make, like, I need help. Like, nutrition professionals need help, and they need to brainstorm, and they need coaches too. And so I thought that was something really important for me to do, just to like make sure I was like good to go and I didn't have like lingering issues around food or what in my messaging or things like that.
So you had this big following, you were selling meal plans, you were trying to not make it super rigid, you were like doing the best you could with what you knew. You felt like it reached this point where you were like, you know what, I need to make some changes in terms of maybe rebranding and refocusing my message in places that feel more authentic to me and my philosophy and all of that. So talk about what that was like. I'm really interested to know, because I know people can feel really attached to their beliefs about food, kind of like, it almost feels like arguing about religion sometimes. If you leave the tribe, so to speak, quote unquote, it can feel really offensive, and there can be some anyway, some drama. So talk about it. Anything interesting to share?
I feel like towards the end of it, I was feeling it was a very negative place for me. I was feeling very negative. Different accounts were bothering me and what they promoted. It was bothering me that people were perceiving me a different way. It was really, I felt guilty. There was this level of cognitive dissonance where I was believing something inside that I wasn't like getting across. And so there was all this like limbo and frustration. And when I did decide, I'm just going to try it, I said, I'm just going to rebrand. I thought it was important for me to rebrand as my own person, get a website, and start doing that work. I was like, I'm going to give myself 6 months and just see what happens. And business-wise and growth-wise and professionally, it's been really great. It's been really hard, which is so dumb, to watch. I've lost close to 10,000 followers on Instagram now, which is dumb, but that is where I started. And which I think there's a lot that goes into play. They could be like, who is happily fed? Maybe they didn't notice. Like it used to be Pure Fit, Pure Food. It could have been maybe they were more fitness oriented and it doesn't align with what they believe, or but also Instagram is just slower now. It's not what it used to be, and so that's okay. But I would be lying if I said that it didn't like bother me a little bit.
Head?
Yes. Which is, I'm glad I'm an adult and stuff now, which, I mean, that's a whole nother topic of teenagers and all that stuff. So I think that is hard. And I also had other things personally that like helped me make this shift. Like I said, I have 4 kids. 3 of them are daughters. 2 of them have mental health concerns, or one of them has high functioning autism, and my other daughter has ADHD, which in learning and helping her over the last couple of years, I found out that I have ADHD. That's what I have. And so it's really helped me tap into the mental health side of anxiety, and that we already have anxiety at our house. We don't need to have anxiety around our food choices. And that
on top of what's already there baseline-wise,
so those really influenced that I wanted to just be just a non-diet dietitian that didn't create more anxiety and stress. We don't need that in our food choices.
So it's been hard, but you've gotten the level of supervision or therapy that you've needed to like feel good about the decision. Yes. You've lost followers, but you're just kind of trying to cope with like that, which is, I mean,
it's fine.
It's hard, but
yes.
Yeah. So when you and I first kind of corresponded and talked with each other, we were talking about how like the trend at the time was definitely macros. And we were like, we should break that down at some point. And then today we got together and we were like, we should really talk about keto. And then we kind of decided, you know what, let's just talk in general about plans. And let's talk about what are some of the ways that having a plan, whether it's the meal plan that you made or some other plan, diet, let's call it, because it's taking your authority away and it's externalizing your food choices. What does that do to a person? Like, why doesn't it work? Because sometimes people are like shocked when I say like, I don't really do meal plans, and they're like, well, then what do you even do, right? so
yes.
Yeah, how do you see that? Why not plans?
Oh my gosh, I could talk about this for anything. I think a great analogy is parenthood, where you think like things are going to go a certain way, and my kid would never do that, and I'll never do this, and then your kid is wearing princess pajamas to the grocery store. And I think that is
throwing a fit
on
the floor.
You can't live life on a plan, and you can't, I think that's hard for different personalities to grasp. But I also think there's this level of you have to do what makes you happy. And if wholeheartedly following something that strictly or doing something makes you happy, then who am I or anyone to tell you to not do it? And I think another component, because I've seen it, is, and I think Fiona Willer, who was on your podcast, and I listened to this, she talked about people who have been researching in obesity their whole lives, and that is where they have spent their time and their passion. And so to change that would be really hard. Right. So with anyone, if they're a big macro counter, if they're a big keto person, and that's where they get their income and that's their business and that's their life, I think that would be hard.
On a financial
Yes.
level, on like
Yes.
admitting I might have
Yes.
been wrong level.
Yes. People have a hard time.
That's hard.
Yeah. So, but in another note is that it doesn't matter. Like doing a diet, following a plan it doesn't matter in life. And I think it can be really, in my personal opinion, it can be really worldly and just something that's just not important in your life. It's not something that should exhaust you and stress you, and you don't need it. And I think there's more to life, and establishing what your hopes and dreams and goals are in life. If they are to have a flat stomach or defined shoulders, then maybe it's like worth reevaluating your goals and dreams, because I think, at least for macro counting, that's a huge driver.
Yeah, you were saying that before we started recording. You were saying that it's not necessarily about health. Mm-hmm. A lot of times it's about like manipulating bodies. And so that's maybe an important distinction, along with what you've already said about how like diets are weight focused and hopefully intuitive eating isn't as weight focused. Mm-hmm. Maybe another distinction is, are you truly promoting health, or are you trying to like manipulate or like alter body fat percentage or whatever by doing a certain way of eating?
Exactly. I think in at least the intense macro counting world, that's the driving force, is to change your body, decrease your body fat. And people try to make it not be that way, but then they're full of selfies and before and afters and things like that clearly that is. And they'll say like, oh, this person only lost X amount of weight, but look at their muscles. And how long can you maintain that is another component. And when I was working a lot with different fitness facilities and looking, I used to look a lot at body fat testing, like the results and the comparison. Every time somebody, no matter if they did gain weight, muscle or not, their metabolism lowers every time. So their ability to burn and have an efficient fuel source was less and less every time they restricted calories. And you can't maintain that. You can't keep that up. And I think that's a long road to do for forever and ever.
Well, and so I just actually had a client very recently tell me a story of going and getting her body fat percentage done and her basal metabolic rate tested and the whole workup. And her basal metabolic rate came back at lower than what the technician was wanting to see. Mm-hmm. And so this person, and I'm not sure if it was a technician or someone with credentials or someone who knew what their the science. I'm assuming they didn't know the science because the terrible advice, but what they said was, wow, your metabolism is X amount of calories, so you really should you should never eat X amount of calories. And it was just slightly more. Am I painting a good enough picture without saying the numbers? And so she came and needed to like have a conversation about like what goes into our metabolism. Well, it's our basal metabolic rate, but it's also the thermic effect of food. It's also like how we move our body. And technically, you and I right now, sitting here recording this podcast, we're doing something above and beyond laying down in bed. So you and I are technically physically active right now, above and beyond our BMR. And so the advice of like never go above this amount of calories is just so problematic. And again, that's another reason, just to connect this to my question, that's another reason why plans don't work. It's because we're acting like we're this robotic system that it's all about numbers in, numbers out. We are so much more complex than that.
Yeah, and that's a complicated scenario because I'm thinking a lot about how that message was delivered. Did she mean to say, don't go below this? Like that changes a lot more than don't go.
Right.
Because
could have been misinterpreted.
I mean, people just don't, you realize just to like sit and flow blood through your veins and beat your heart, you need energy to do that. You need food to do that. And so all this trying to make that a mathematical equation, which I saw that a ton of people would plateau, and people would say, oh, just like let's up the carbs and let's down the protein, and then we'll adjust this and we'll see if that helps. And it was, nobody really knows what they're doing.
Well, and
no one.
And here's the thing too, and if anyone says that they know and has all the answers, that's a giant red flag that they just want your money. Because really, like, no one can guarantee what your weight is going to do.
No.
The only person that really knows what your weight is going to do, and I'm personifying your body, but like, your body knows. Your body knows what it wants to be, and your job is to support it in all aspects of self-care, nutrition and food being one of them, and then just let it be what it is. And life is so much better when you do that, because all of a sudden you have time to like pursue your hopes and dreams, like you were talking about. You have time to think about other things. You have time to progress in other areas of life. So plans and programs, even though they're tempting, and they're sometimes like really kind of sexy, like, ooh, like do this, I have the answers. It's really another distinction too, is like, it's kind of a short game, right? It's like, well, in 14 days you get this result, or in 28 days this is what's going to happen. But realistically, we're not, like, you have to live beyond 14 days from now, and what's going to happen then, right? And so it's looking at intuitive eating and pursuing kind of a weight neutral approach to health. Hopefully gives you this place where you can, pursue health in a way that feels sustainable and realistic long term. Like, I could eat the same way I'm eating right now, I could eat that way in 5 years. And I know I feel confident in that.
Right.
Because when your brain is thinking, all right, I can do this for now, but in 20 days, I cannot wait to, stop doing this and finally be able to eat that. That sets you up for, like you were saying, decreased metabolic rate, but then also, like, what are you going to do when you're around bread for the first time after that? You're not just going to eat like a normal amount of bread. Yeah.
That's when people feel out of control, when they're used to following a plan. And I think another thing plans do is they don't allow you to know what you like. You don't know what your preferences are. I had a client who was eating like the same thing for lunch. It was just basically combining the macronutrients, and after meeting with her, like, that was kind of just one of our first steps to work on. I was like, I just want you to just have something else for lunch. Just try. And she didn't know what she wanted. And she told me she had called her son to bring her lunch because she didn't pack anything. She didn't know it. And he was like, what do you want me to bring you? And she's like, I don't know, surprise me. Like, which is really sad, because food is so fun and delicious and good, and you should be able to, like, know what you like and don't like.
Right. Sometimes, I can't tell you how many times people have looked at me with, like, the most blank stare when I just asked the simple question, like, well, what do you like to eat? People are like, wait, what? Like, I literally never thought of that. Yeah. And to some listeners, that might sound kind of crazy. Like, really, of course people know what they like, but really there are places you can get with your food and with your vulnerability to these dieting messages, where you just let all of, like, your humanity with food go, including, like, enjoying it and getting excited about it and honoring hunger and fullness. Some of the most basic things fly out the window in the name of health, quote unquote, or in the name of weight loss.
Right.
So tapping into what you actually like to eat is huge. And it actually, sometimes people feel afraid of that, because they're like, well, if I eat like this when I'm not even eating stuff I like, what am I going to do when I finally eat foods I really enjoy? And my response to that is always, I think you'll be surprised. Like, I think you actually, when you enjoy it, you actually recognize when you're not enjoying it quite as much, and when that might be, time to start thinking about slowing down or stopping or whatever, right?
Yeah. And I think too, when you really pay attention to preferences of what you really, really like, you kind of notice different versions that taste good to you. Like, maybe if you're restricting and you see like a bag of Oreos and you are like, I can't have that, I am not eating sugar right now or whatever, and then you give in and you eat a sleeve of Oreos and you feel really bad. If you give yourself permission to eat, or maybe you don't even like Oreos, maybe you would rather have a different kind of cookie, and
you're only eating them out of rebellion. Sometimes
I think that is huge for people when they think, well, if you're just going to tell me I get to eat whatever I want, then I'll just, like, endlessly gain weight forever and ever. And I don't think that's the case. I think you learn what foods matter to you and what don't. And I would rather have like a homemade delicious cookie than have a sleeve of Oreos.
Me too.
Yeah.
That's like my dessert. Like homemade chocolate chip cookie
Yes.
is my jam. Another thing that comes to mind is just that plans don't, especially like a meal plan, like when someone tells you this is what you eat at this time and this is what you eat at this other time, you made the point that someone emailed you like, look at me, I'm bringing my food to my mother-in-law's house, and you're like, oh, forehead, like face palm, whatever, like I can't believe it. But to them, they thought, oh, look, I'm following the rules, I'm so awesome. But what that just misses out on is that food is so much more than fuel. Like we're not robots who just need energy. We need energy, but we also need nourishment on like a very figurative level that we get from food, of connecting with others on over the table, eating the same foods together. And so I complain about that when it comes to diets or rigid plans, is that, it doesn't take into account the important role that food plays in your family relationships, in life, in culture, in religion, in connecting yourself to like people who have come before you. I mean, people eat differently in Utah than they eat in the South, and people eat differently, in California than in Canada or, wherever. And so it's unfair to say this is how everybody should eat. It's kind of like a little bit problematic on like a race, class, gender, like just all those levels, right?
Yes. I think that is a huge point too. And that ADHD doctor that I was talking to you about, he always talks about vitamin C, which is connection, which is huge for our health and being connected.
Huge.
And so when you are following a plan that is so restrictive that you have to take your own food to lunch, or you say, I can't go out. I mean, when Whole30 first came out, and some of those accounts, people would post that some of their tips for adhering to it would be to not go to lunch with friends, which is complete isolation and social withdrawal, which is far more detrimental to our health than going to lunch and having whatever,
something
or having
out at a restaurant.
Yes. And so I think, and the other part of the connection is food is something we all have in common. You talked about all these we eat different everywhere we go, but that is something that we all can connect over, is food. That's something we all have in common. So if you're ever feeling alone, or you feel like you need to connect with someone, you just take a dessert to your neighbors, or you invite people over for dinner, or you say to your friends, let's go get lunch. Food connects us, and that's how it's just huge.
And it should be that way. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. We don't need to fight against that. That's something to lean into and appreciate and love. That's one of the most beautiful parts of being human, is connecting with each other with food. Because you connect on so many levels. You connect about whatever you're talking about, but then you also connect about how yummy the food is, and you connect about being grateful for the food, and you connect in so many cool ways. It's just... Food is so complicated, isn't it?
It is.
It doesn't need to be, though.
No, it doesn't. No.
Is there anything else you would add about kind of understanding why plans can be kind of problematic?
No, other than I just think it, like you mentioned a little bit ago, it kind of attaches morality. Like, if you're following it, you're being really good, and if you don't, I was bad this week, or I cheated, which I've always hated that. Like, that connotation, because cheating is a very negative word, and it shouldn't be attached to food. So I think that's what it does, is it makes you feel valued, or important, or you're doing a good job, you're the A+ student, or you're a failure, and that's just not the case. And that was just one of the things that I was kind of done with. And I had gotten a lot of people that would reach out and say, I just want to lose like 10 pounds. I've been holding on to this amount of weight, and I just want to lose this amount of weight. And I just got so like tired of like that. Just who cares? Like, that is so minuscule in the grand scheme of things. and the amount of effort to even achieve that is really intense. It's a lot. If you really want to do that, that's a lot of work. And then what? Because it'll come right back.
Right. Exactly. And then you'll blame yourself and try the next one. And next thing you know, your health is not great because you're so chaotic and dysfunctional in food, but also probably in other aspects of life too.
Yeah. I think one of the best way to just avoid it and steer clear of it is to just really immerse yourself and educate yourself on what diet culture is, what wellness culture is, what your own diet thoughts and mentality and ideas are in your head, and just solely being aware of that. Just when you walk into Jamba Juice and there is a fat booster you can add or whatever, fat burning booster, that's diet culture. That is like something I don't need. And I think you just need to be skeptical of all the messages. And the more you're aware, then when you see plans and things like that, you're like, oh, I don't care. Like, that doesn't impact me. I know I don't need that in my life.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about plans. Let's take a minute to talk about, like, what could someone do instead? Because I want to end on that note a little bit, just from the perspective of, I don't want this to feel like anyone's being personally attacked. Again, like you said, if something is like working for you and you're really living the life you want to live and the way you're eating is like allowing you to like live in alignment with your values, that's awesome. No one's trying to stop you. But we just want to get you to critically examine your eating and your beliefs around food and bodies and see where you might be able to hone in on a kind, gentle approach to food that feels really nourishing and good for you. So I think we've been using the word plan, and I'm not like anti-plan, right? Like I think like a person can potentially have a general idea of a structure of what their day could look like. For example, breakfast, lunch, dinner, right? Like there's nothing wrong with planning on lunch around noon or like planning on dinner around 6. No one's saying like drop all ideas of structure and planning and just eat whenever, whatever. I think what we want to kind of maybe explore just in the last few minutes is just what does that look like in a gentle, compassionate way? Like how could someone plan stuff out without losing their brain?
Yeah, I think a few things that, we live in a world and most of us have jobs and children and other passions besides eating that we can't just like stand in front of our fridge and say, what feels good to me today every day. We can't be driving down the road and look and have something hit you. Oh, that sounds good. That's where I'll go. We have to have some sort of plan in our lives. And, I said I had ADHD and that's something I have to write things down. I have to have a plan or things are a little bit chaotic. And so I think, having, when we're looking at a week, having like 3 meals on hand, like ideas of meals on hand helps me personally. And that means other days might be leftovers or breakfast for dinner or we go out. But you have to be able to go to the store and get the ingredients because you can't go to the store every day. That doesn't fit into our schedule. So I think, and like I said earlier, that nourishment is a form of self-care. You have to at least implement that. But I think people transitioning from a lot of following plans or doing diets, I think are really confused about what direction to take. And I think food journaling really, really helps. I think trying things, going to the grocery store and maybe trying something new or something that you thought you couldn't have, but you're going to give yourself the permission to try.
Yourself,
I think those are, and writing about it, I am a huge advocate of writing things down. I know we live in a digital age and everyone has an app, but getting a pen and paper and writing it out is very, very therapeutic. And that's something that I do. I have a journal subscription for food journaling and self-care that you can, it's kind of guided. It gives you 3 ideas of foods to try. It's a blank shopping list, so you can write things down. I think that is really helpful for people transitioning, or sometimes people come and they don't want to be attached to any plan. And so as you work on giving yourself permission, then that can come into play. So it kind of just depends on the person and their journey. But I think journaling is
for sure
a big deal.
Yeah, I like that idea. I think also recognizing that it's very normal if the pendulum has been kind of put up into this kind of restrictive, rigid plan type of place, and then all of a sudden you're letting that go. Like physics dictates that pendulum is going to swing over into another extreme. And while that's not fun to go through, just knowing that levels off eventually, especially if you don't freak out, especially if you're gentle with yourself, know that you might, like intuitive eating calls it, like the donuts and Doritos phase or whatever. Like you might feel like you just need to like get all the things in that you couldn't eat before. And you might feel a little chaotic and out of control there, but just know that like that doesn't last forever. And that's kind of like very normal part of the process for a lot of people who go through this. But there is this hope on the other side to find this really peaceful place where you're able to take into account your nutrition knowledge, but you're also able to take into account what sounds good, and you're also able to take into account what will satisfy me and what will nourish me and what will feel good and all these things can come into the picture of how you make decisions about food. It doesn't need to be so
and how much time do you have? Like maybe you don't have time to make that dinner tonight, so you can tomorrow, or you were going to make this, but you are at a baseball game and it's going to take forever to get home, and you can stop and grab something on the way home. I think that is just a natural intuitive eater, that you kind of go with the flow, and that can be really hard for some people to go with the flow.
A little bit of flexibility.
Trusting, yes. I think when you look at a nourishment plan or whatever you want to call it, that it comes from a place of flexibility and not a black and white. Like this is, I think when you can just make that change, I think that helps a lot.
For sure. And like I say a lot on the podcast and also with my clients, like doing this work with food can't help but seep into other areas of your life. So if you're working on trying to notice black and white thinking with food, you get better at that in other areas of life. If you work on being kinder to yourself with food and your body, you get better at it in relationships and in other areas. And that's why this stuff is so meaningful to work on. It seems kind of surfacey and kind of like, oh, food, whatever. It's not that big of a deal, but it is. You have to do it multiple times a day, and it can teach you so much about yourself and about life. And I think there's a lot of valuable lessons to learn there.
Yeah. And if you're a parent and you have kids, I think it's huge for parenting. And as your kids get older and deal with different things, I think doing the work on yourself, you are more able to address the issues that they may have, or the sorrows or the hardships that they go through, because you've kind of done the work on yourself and you know how to do it.
So true. Well, this has been awesome. Is there anything else you wanted to say that we didn't get to, or anything else you want to say to wrap it up?
I think that was great. I think that the bottom line is, do what makes you happy, and just be a little bit more flexible. And I think if you've ever felt guilty about different food choices or where you've been in your life, that's a normal human emotion. And I think guilt is something that makes us want to do better and be better next time. I think when we are more shameful, that's something that needs to be addressed. But I don't think guilt is always a negative emotion. I think it can transition. It requires you to kind of assess what's going on.
Sure.
Yeah. So
something to lean into. Maybe. Well, awesome. So tell people how they can follow along with you.
Yep. So my Instagram handle is just happily fed, and my website is happilyfed.life. Email is hello@happilyfed.life. So
awesome. Thanks so much for being here, Deborah.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I sincerely hope you've enjoyed this conversation. If you haven't already, please go ahead and leave a review on iTunes. Thanks again so much for listening, and we'll see you soon for another episode.